Right, good morning members. I'd like to welcome everybody present here today and those watching on YouTube to the 9th of March meeting of the Area Planning Committee for the Central and East area of the county. As usual, these meetings will be recorded and they're being televised live out onto the YouTube channel. So I would ask members to be mindful of comments that they put in the chat function. The chat function is only used when you would like to indicate that you'd like to speak. So there should be no conversation going backwards and forwards in the chat function. Now, could I ask everybody and remind everybody to put your phones on silent? And at all times, when you don't want to indicate that you want to speak, if you can have your microphone on mute, please. It just saves with the feedback in the background. We do have 2 items on the agenda this morning. We do have some speakers for each of those items, but I'll do the introductions as we get nearer to the items on the agenda. Thank you for that. So we'll go on to the agenda now, and part A, item number 1 are apologies for absence. So can I have the apologies read out? Martin, are you there with the apologies?
Morning, Chair. It's Michael Turnbull from Community Services.
Right,
we've had apologies from councillors Cochrane, Coult, Davidson, Freeman, Robinson, Shuttleworth and Taylor for this morning's meeting.
Thank you, Michael. And item 2, do we have any substitute members?
Chair, we have Councillor Arnie Simpson substituting for Councillor Bev Could.
Good morning, Councillor Simpson. So item 3, we have the minutes of the meeting that was held on the 12th of January. If members remember, there were no items for the February committee meeting. So the minutes of the meeting that was held on the 12th of January are included on pages 3 to 16. Does anybody have any comments on those minutes? Anybody who was present at the meeting? Do you have any comments on those minutes, please?
Move those minutes, Chairman.
Well, there was nobody who was present there indicating, so thank you for that, Councillor Len. Do we have a seconder for the minutes?
I'll second those.
Thank you, Councillor Iverson. So now we come on to item 4. And does anybody on the committee have any declarations of interest in either of the items on the agenda this morning?
I do, Councillor Clark. I would like to declare prejudicial interest in 5A on the agenda.
Right, thank you for that, Councillor Hawley. So you realise you will have to leave the meeting for that part of the agenda. Thank you, and you'll be notified when it's time to come back in, so you won't miss item 5B. Thank you for that. Neil, do you need any more information on why that's, or are you satisfied with just the prejudicial interest?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think it would be useful if Councillor Hawley could just indicate exactly what the nature of that interest is. It doesn't have to be in any great detail, but just so that everyone understands what it's about.
Yes, I'm also a colleague and also a friend of the applicant today.
Thank you, Councillor Hawley.
Yeah. Thank you. So before we go on to item 5 on the agenda, which are the 2 actual planning applications, at this juncture, because I've already spoken to Neil, it was remiss of me not to do it earlier, actually, to do some introductions for what would normally be the top table in the committee meeting. So I'll do the usual, and I'll imagine in my head as though I'm going from my right-hand side. And on the very right-hand side, we would have the minute taker. And Michael, I understand that's you in this morning's meeting.
Thanks, Chair. I'm Michael Turnbull, the Senior Community Service Officer.
And then next to Michael, we would have Neil. Neil, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm Neil Carter. I'm the solicitor to the committee. Thank
you, Neil. And then moving over to my left-hand side, I would have Sarah. You introduce yourself, please.
Morning, Chair. Thank you. Sarah Odridge, I'm the area team leader for the planning team.
Thank you. And then normally we would have whichever planning officer is dealing with whichever presentation on the item. So we'll move on now to item 5A, which is a planning application at Hill Rise House, 13 Durham Road West in Boburn, And this is, well, you can see on your papers, I won't read all that out because I'm sure the planning officer who was with us this morning, actually it's Alan Doby who's taken this item in place of the planning officer, Michelle Hurton. So Alan, I'm sure you will explain fully what the item is about during your presentation. So at this point, it's over to you, Alan. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Hello, everybody. My name's Alan Doby. I'm Principal Planning Officer for the Central and East team, and I'll be doing the first presentation this morning. If you bear with me for a few seconds, it takes a little while for the presentation to load up. Can I just confirm that you're seeing the right thing on the screen there? Are you seeing the presentation?
I can say the right thing, Alan. I'm not sure if everybody's on mute. Seems to be quite a lot of crackling going on there as you were getting that presentation up. So thank you, committee, if we can remain on mute until it's the time for debate. Thank you, Alan. Okay.
Right then, well, obviously it's a fairly wordy screen, but I'll go through it. Obviously, it's a property that in Durham Road West at Boburn. And the application before members today is to replace an existing conservatory in the backyard with a single-storey extension, to replace some pitched roofs with a flat roof, replace the windows of the property, apply render to the front elevation of the property, install a gate to the side, increase the height of the side boundary wall, replace some felt hanging on the front with some cladding, and also want to install a security shutter. As the title indicates, part of the work is retrospective. In other words, it's already taken place and there is some work still to take place. So moving forward then, the Ordnance Survey plan on the left-hand side shows the location of the property outlined in red. It's on the end of a terrace next to the side lane that gives access to the rears of the adjacent properties along the same terrace. The aerial photograph on the right provides a bit more context, where the location fronting onto the main street can be clearly seen, alongside the relationship of the property with the surrounding area. This next set of photos, the top left one shows the front elevation before the recent works were carried out. And of particular note here, I think, is the variation in brickwork, which is just above the door level, which has resulted from previous alterations in the past. And also the tile cladding that's located between the two bare windows above and below. The bottom right photo shows the current situation with the cleaned up brickwork at first floor level, the grey render having been applied below that, and new windows with grey frames, and also the renewed cladding between the windows. On this slide, the top left photo shows the previous arrangement with the gable sign that advertised the previous guest house business that operated from the premises prior to the current applicants taking over. The bottom right photo shows the current arrangement with the repointed and cleaned up brickwork, which clearly looks different, and also the new funeral business sign that's now been attached to the wall. That has been subject to a separate planning permission. On this one, the top left photograph shows the current rear elevation, with the bottom right photo showing the part, rear and side elevations. These, I feel, help to show the variation in the extensions and alterations that have taken place over time, which has really resulted in a fairly disjointed appearance when viewed from the side or the rear. The proposal before members today seeks to rationalise this, as will be discussed later in the presentation. This is a slide we've put on to show the locations of other rendered properties. I mean, basically one of the issues raised in detail in the report is whether render is a suitable finish for the front elevation. This is a matter that's been raised by through representations as well. So what we're showing here is the other rendered properties in the vicinity of the site. So it does help in our view to demonstrate that this type of finish is not uncommon in the area. There are 2 shown on the opposite side of the road, 1 opposite across the side lane, and another 3 further along the road. These next couple of photographs actually show those properties, just to demonstrate that there is as I say, a variation in materials. These match up with the numbered properties on the previous slide. So numbers 1 and 2 are on the opposite side of the road to the premises. Number 3 is the one on the corner across the side lane. This is the one that shows the properties along the street a little bit further away. Taken together, I think the photos, both the previous ones and these, do show a mix of plain render and pebble dash in the area, which really indicate, in our view, there's no consistency of external materials, although it is predominantly red brick on many of the properties there. Just to point out that photo 6 on the right might actually be a little bit out of date now, because one of these properties has been granted permission for a new shopfront. But obviously the point is really to do with the render on the properties as opposed to the actual finish. Which are clearly seen on the top right photo and on the bottom left. I think what they do show is as I say, the variation in the roof lines and the nature and the different extensions that have been added over time. This one shows the finished scheme, which incorporates both the retrospective elements that we've mentioned and also the rest of the proposals that are yet to start, and those being principally the works in the rear yard. The side and rear elevations, I think here help to demonstrate the rationalisation and the tidying up of the roof lines and the reduced prominence of the extensions that result from that change in the design. So in terms of consultation responses, the Highway Authority has offered no objections. Parish Council have expressed concern that the works were not being treated as retrospective, and while the works have been carried out to a high standard, they did not consider the works to be in keeping with the conservation area across the road. The Design and Conservation Officer has offered no objections. One letter of representation has been received and 4 letters of objection. Comments are briefly summarised below, although they're obviously dealt with in much more detail in the report itself. So to go through them briefly, the objectors feel they weren't notified of the change of use approval, resulting in their lack of confidence in the planning process. The previous concerns haven't been addressed, including highway congestion, function rooms in the premises, the operation of a mortuary, how would waste be handled, are chapels to be used as chapels or as function rooms. In response, the applicants intend no trade waste and they query whether this means the preparation of deceased will not be taking place there or that food waste won't be created. They point out that the proposed roof plan shows an access which isn't on the elevations and are querying the accuracy of that. Feel that insufficient information was submitted with the application. I think just in response to those previous concerns, these issues really have been fully addressed in the report. But I think in response, we would say that the established planning procedure is that any residents who comment on an application are not actually notified of the outcome. It is their responsibility to keep their own check on this, and correspondence that we send out advises them of this. The rest of those points raised relate to the previous planning permission and can't really be taken into account in relation to this particular application. So to look at these representations, the neighbour notification letters were not stating the application is part retrospective when the website does. They feel it's unclear which parts were retrospective and 2 separate applications would have helped. They objected to the previous application regarding parking, and since then parking at the premises has been poor. Some concern over changing the pitched roofs to a flat roof, and a point made that none of the development should overhang the highway. It appears one of the roofs actually falls to the highway and drains that way. Just to cover those points there, the first point was subsequently rectified and new consultations were undertaken. We feel it is reasonable and appropriate to deal with the joint application, and all aspects are given due consideration. Parking is not relevant to this particular application because it relates only to external works, but planning officers have not received any complaints about the use since it commenced in terms of parking or other issues. The roof design will be discussed in the next part of the presentation. The roof overhang issue was dealt with in the course of the application after it was raised, and that's now been rectified so that all of the drainage goes into the yard itself and not externally. At this point, I need to advise members that further comments were received after publication of the report. The objector is unable to attend today, but did ask that we raise these concerns directly with members. They're concerned that they received 4 notifications altogether, 2 which mentioned part retrospective and 2 did not, so there was some confusion. He queries how the committee will know what is retrospective and what is not. He advises that he tried clarifying this but got no response and nothing was changed. He queries how the decision can be made by the committee without the correct facts. In response to this, we're not aware that the case officer has had any direct contact from the objector to be able to actually advise on the queries. We feel it would be reasonable to assume that anyone living locally would generally be aware of the works that have taken place to the property and probably seen those in progress. But in saying that, the case officer is available to answer queries if need be. For members' clarification, there is a list of retrospective works in paragraph 5 of the report. I think it's important to point out, however, that regardless of any uncertainty over this, the planning application is actually for the whole development, whether or not already completed. So it needs to be assessed on that basis. It really makes no difference to officers' consideration of the proposals whether part of the scheme has already been done. Having said that, I think it's appropriate to comment at this stage that retrospective applications are disappointing for officers to receive, and of course for committee members to have to determine when work has been undertaken without the necessary planning permission. However, planning legislation does actually make provision for this type of application and for works to be regularised if they are acceptable, or they can still be open to refusal if not acceptable. The position on this will be considered next. So these are the main planning considerations listed there. I'll go through them one by one. In terms of principle of development, planning permission for the change of use of the property from guest house to funeral directors was granted in June 2020. The works proposed under this current application relate to external alterations connected with that change of use. These include replacing the conservatory with an extension, replacing the various pitched roofs with one overall flat roof, replacing windows, increasing the boundary wall height, and rendering the lower part of the front elevation. The works that have already been undertaken and are retrospective include the replacement windows, the front render, and replacing hanging felt tiles with cladding. As alterations to an existing building within the built-up area, the works are acceptable in principle, subject to consideration of detailed issues. So we move on to visual amenity and setting of the conservation area. The site is not actually within Boburn Conservation Area, but is just on the edge of it across the road. The considerations, therefore, are the character and appearance of the property itself and the potential impact on the setting of the conservation area. The Council's design officer has assessed this and provided comments to assist the planning case officer's consideration of the application. The front render, although not normally appropriate on a traditional red brick property, is considered acceptable here by reason of covering up the mismatched brickwork on a prominent front elevation. Because of the other examples of render in the vicinity, as demonstrated by the photographs in the presentation, this type of external finish could not be described as out of keeping with its surroundings. For similar reasons, it's not considered to adversely impact on the setting of the conservation area. Flat roofs would normally be discouraged as has been mentioned by objectors. However, given the variation in roof lines at the rear, a flat roof here would rationalise and tidy up the current arrangement, resulting in a simplified and improved appearance to the rear and side elevations. The other works are generally to repair and upgrade the property and are also acceptable. In terms of highway safety, although this issue has been raised by objectors, the current application for external works only does not have any direct implications for traffic movements other than builders' works, vans and such like. The issue of traffic in relation to the use was fully considered in association with the previous application and cannot be reconsidered as part of the current scheme. On this basis, the highway officers offer no objections. Turning to residential amenity, the main impacts of the proposals in terms of neighbours' amenities would be to actually reduce the height of the current rear extensions by removal of the pitched roofs and replacing them with a lower flat roof. The visual impacts would therefore be lessened, while also allowing more light into the yard of the adjoining property. The other issues that we've mentioned were a number of concerns which have been fully addressed in the report and covered briefly earlier in the presentation to do with contacts and such like. To summarise, objectors are no longer notified about the outcome of a plan application, although this did form part of the process some years ago. Responsibility lies with them to keep a check on this. Matters relating to the operational side of the funeral business are not relevant to the consideration of this planning application, which is for external changes only. And finally, a concern was raised by an objector about the original roof layout draining towards the external walls and possibly requiring a gutter overhanging the highway. This was raised with the applicants and addressed through a revised design and submission of an amended plan that then resolved the issue with all parts of the building draining into the site. So we now come to the final slide and the conclusions on this application. So firstly, the principle of development is acceptable. Secondly, the external changes proposed are not considered to have an adverse impact on the setting of the conservation area or residential and visual amenity around the site itself. There are no highways objections, and it's felt that the proposal does not detrimentally impact on the character or appearance of the area. The application is felt to meet the requirements of the National Planning Policy framework as well as local policies. The objections and concerns raised have been taken into account and addressed within the report. On balance, the concerns raised were not felt to be of sufficient weight to justify refusal of this application. I think just one final point to make is that, bear in mind some of the works are retrospective. It is standard practice to add an informative to any decision made if approval is granted, to warn the applicants of the risks of applying retrospectively, because this could lead to work having to be rectified and reinstated, in the hope that this informative will avoid the situation happening with the same people in the future. So that concludes the presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that presentation, Alan. Got a little bit of a feedback on there. Is everybody still on mute? It might be your microphone. Right, I think that's rectified the fault there. Right, committee. So, as I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, we do have some speakers who would like to comment on this application, and I'll take them in the regulation order. And first, I'd like to welcome Councillor Maura McCune to the meeting, who is the local ward member. So, Councillor McEwen, if you'd like to make your representations now, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I've been contacted by residents around the Durham Road West area, which is just behind the property, about some concerns that they have about this planning application. The concern that we share is over the electric gate and the arrangements for hearses and other vehicles to enter the yard, where it said the cargo will be unloaded into the funeral directors. I have concerns that there's not enough room for a hearse to manoeuvre or even maybe fit in that yard, and that there isn't going to be sufficient space for the vehicles that are needed. That would mean that there are vehicles, large hearses, parking regularly on the path, which is a footpath that's going to become increasingly busy in Boburn as the area behind Durham Road West is developed and more people start using these footways to get into and out of the village. and to walk around the village. Part of the reason why I'm concerned is that although planning officers have said there have been no complaints about parking since permission was given last June for the change of use, that's because the club hasn't been operating at its usual capacity. It mostly hasn't been operating at all, and neither has the hairdressers. In fact, the hairdressers has had to cordon off half of its seats within the hairdressers, so it's only working at half capacity. And I know this because that is my hairdressers. And when I went in there last year, it was only working at half capacity. And that means that if there is a parking issue, then it would not have been detected so far. And I know from using that hairdressers that actually there is congestion in that area. And as much as we're told that that was an issue for the previous application and not for this one, I've looked through the details of the previous application and I can't find a detailed highways report that confirms that to me. Maybe I'm missing something, but looking through the details both of this application and the previous application, I'm not seeing a lot of data, a lot of argument from our highways department about the impact that it'll have. I'm not seeing very many specifics. And I understand that this was granted at a time when we wouldn't be able to do an effective parking survey. Because of lockdown, because of the fact that a lot of the traders who would have people parking there regularly weren't trading. And although I do see some of the argument for not including this as an issue with this application and future applications at this property, I have to disagree because of the difficult situation we've all been living in for a year now. We've just not been able to have a proper conversation around that. And I don't want the committee to close that conversation down now when actually it could become pertinent to the village in the future. I'd also like to talk about the application being retrospective. I know that's not a reason to refuse an application, but we're getting a lot of retrospective applications across my division now, and residents and myself and parish councils and community groups across the division are becoming more and more frustrated that work is taking place without them being able to have a proper say through the process. And I know that this isn't something that a committee can act on as such, but I do think it's important that when possible, local members take a stand against retrospective applications, particularly when it's in such a sensitive area as the key commercial area of a growing village like Boburn. That's really what I wanted to say, and I'd like to thank the committee for their time.
Thank you for your comments, Councillor McEwen. Now, I know that we do have a highways officer who hasn't been introduced to the committee yet. I will go back to you, Alan, if there's anything that you would like to answer, and you may want to pass over to our highways officer, Dave Battensby, who's with us there and ready to come in to speak. So, Alan, do you have anything to add before we move over to Dave?
Chair, I think it might be useful to hear the other speaker first because there may be similar issues, so I'll hang back until we've heard that and then we'll come back with some comments.
Yeah, very sensible. Okay then, so now we will move over to the other speaker, and I'd like to welcome Dennis Morgan to the meeting this morning. And I understand you wish to speak in objection to this application, Mr. Morgan. So if you would like to start your presentation now, you do have up to 5 minutes to speak, and I'm sure Michael Turnbull will keep you right if we're heading towards that time scale. So over to you, Mr. Morgan.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you perfectly, so I'm assuming everybody else is okay too.
I don't have the familiarity with these systems that you clearly enjoy yourself, but and I'm obliged to Councillor McEwen, as she seems to have taken a large part of what I was about to say, but nevertheless, the repetition might be helpful in these circumstances. It is the case that the process of this particular development has been impacted by COVID, and I don't think the constraints on business and communications have been fully appreciated, and certainly they don't appear to have been fully appreciated by the decision making of the initial meeting to grant consent for a funeral home. And that was in June of last year, just as we emerged from a lockdown crisis. We started to get back to normal. In context, I need to explain that residents, including myself, made representations to the Planning Authority on highway impacts, amenity impacts, noises and orders coming from the premises, and to a lesser extent at that time on the impact on the conservation area. But nevertheless, I have to recognise that those concerns appear to have been considered and were dealt with, as I've said, in June. So I have to concentrate my representations on today's application. But before proceeding to that, I need to make it clear that I, and I think only one other resident of the area, has objected in any form to a funeral home being established on these premises. Such a facility is welcome in the area, and any impacts, alleged or otherwise, are community impacts that I'll be referring to, not to personal impacts in terms of the impact on house prices or anything of that case. As you see from the map, there's a working men's club in the area, and that usually is not conducive to increasing people's house price values. So the funeral home per se is not an issue and never has been. The position that you've got before you this morning is case 3406. And if I can begin by reference to the paragraph 6 of the officer's report, which explains that this forum is being convened in this method because the applicant's relation to a member of your council. Such declaration, as far as I can trace, was not made in the earlier decision process. That was case 7401, the one that determined the funeral home. So there's a lack of consistency there as far as can be determined from the online evidence of the reporting process. And certainly I or other residents don't appear.
1 minute remaining.
The highway issue that I wish to concentrate on is the installation of the electric gate. I echo exclusively Councillor McEwen's concerns that long wheelbase vehicles will not be able to deliver materials to the deceased to this establishment without obstructing the footway. That is clearly prejudicial to highway safety and certainly prejudicial to the safety of wheelchair users and mums and dads pushing children's buggies. They have to deviate onto the carriageway. So if that's not prejudicial to highway safety, then what is? The conservation impact, the conservation officer has reported to you that he sees nothing wrong in maintaining the render on the building in question. The effect of that will give license to other persons seeking to render properties in the conservation area and will clearly devalue the protections available to society at large, including yourselves, in the future. In short, approving that will give a rod to the back of future planning authority planning meetings when considering rendering in the conservation area or neighbouring properties. It would
Thank
be.
you for that, Mr. Morgan. You've actually you've gone over your time, and I just wondered, do you have many more, you know, pertinent points that you wish to bring up, or were you just?
No, I think it behoves me to perhaps respond to the applicant's observations in your document at I think it's paragraph 26, when he talks about there is no current parking problem. Well, there wouldn't be, for the reasons that Councillor McEwen has described. The trading circumstances of it being at least 50%, the pressure on parking from a number of businesses, far more than they were listed by Councillor McEwen. There are 2 hairdressers, all who compete with public parking space. This business has no exclusive parking available to it.
Right, thank you for that, Mr. Morgan. I just wanted to allow you the opportunity to fully say what you wanted to say. Yeah, thank you. So, Alan, we'll come back to you first, and then perhaps you'll want to hand over to David at some opportunity. So, Alan, can we have responses from yourself, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. There was just a few points I think to cover there. In terms of the concerns about the electric gate that's been mentioned, and about whether there's room to get a hearse in the yard. I actually looked back at the committee report that we did previously, and that does actually refer specifically to that issue. I think there was some concern that the site might be a little bit tight for that, but that was fully assessed by the highways officer and considered to be acceptable. I think it was acknowledged it's quite a tight space. I suspect an electric gate would actually be beneficial in terms of facilitating access to that. But again, I'll come back to the earlier point that this was something that was dealt with as part of the previous change of use application and really can't be revisited at this particular stage. And also I fully appreciate Councillor McEwen's concerns about the fact that the highways issues shouldn't be simply dismissed and should continue to be a debating point. But to be fair, the application for the change of use has been determined, the decision was made, and that's something that we have to live with, whatever the situation happens in the future. That's a planning permission that's been properly granted by the council, and therefore is a valid permission to take forward. The retrospective issue, yes, I mean, this is always a concern of members and a concern of officers. People feel on the back foot a little bit, I think, when works have already been undertaken and feel that it's somewhat of a foregone conclusion, but that's absolutely not the case. Whilst legislation allows for the submission of a retrospective application, it also requires the local planning authority to take full account of all of the relevant planning issues. And if it is concluded that permission would not have been granted had the application been made prior to the works, then permission ought to be refused. Or the alternative is perhaps a compromise situation where some aspects are unacceptable and some are not, and therefore an application can be conditioned to rectify certain issues. So it's by no means the case that because works have been undertaken that our hands are tied and we are fettered by that. And I dare say our legal officer might clarify that point as well if needs be. Sorry, I've just lost contact there. I don't know. Did you miss any of that?
I think the screen froze for a few seconds just towards the end. But it seems as if you had finished speaking, actually, Alan. All right, okay. I think the other point to make is that, with retrospective applications, there isn't actually any punishment that the local authority can invoke. As I say, the facility is there to make that application, to apply retrospectively and try and have work regularised. So we just simply have to look objectively at the appropriate planning considerations and determine applications on that basis.
I think just to cover the point about that Mr. Morgan raised about the render being used, again, I think we've fully addressed that in the report, and I did so earlier in the presentation. There were clearly good reasons why render was felt to be appropriate here. As I say, there was a difference in the brickwork, which I can bring the photograph back up if members wish to see that. But I think that demonstrated that there was a good case to actually put some render on here, and we've seen other examples in there. That doesn't mean that we would have to approve render on other properties elsewhere. Each one is dealt with on its own case-by-case basis, so we would consider the particular circumstances and whether render on other properties on future applications might be appropriate. If not, we could conclude otherwise. Again, I think it's important to note that this property is outside the conservation area, so to a certain extent, I think our consideration of the impacts of that are slightly less than if it was actually within the conservation area. This is just on the edge of, and the legislation requires us to consider the setting of the conservation area and whether that is significantly adversely affected. I think given that this is just on the outside of it, our design officers concluded that that is not the case, and we don't feel able to support a refusal based on a rendered finish here. So I think that's sufficient, other than perhaps to ask our highways officer if he wishes to comment on further on the highways issues. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Alan. So Dave, would you like to introduce yourself, please, and give any comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is David Battensby. I'm the Principal Highway Development Management Engineer. As Mr. Dobie has already said, the application for the change of use was previously dealt with and highways issues were considered at that time. It was a change of use from a guest house, and it was noted that that would have had parking generated as a use of that business. And it was also noticed that the amount of parking generated by a funeral business is likely to be less than that generated by a guest house. It was also discussed with the applicant at that time regarding the visitors to the premises, and they would be by application, and there would only be one visit allowed to each unit within the property. With regards to the rear access for the hearse for the delivery of the deceased, it was noted that the rear courtyard available was just shy of 8 metres, and when inquired, a hearse vehicle was 6 metres. So there was sufficient space considered, whilst tight, to accommodate that. And the use of a roller shutter is far better than with opening gates, which would have actually had to enter into the property, which would have meant that it was really tight. So the roller shutter is a better alternative to opening gates. I think that's all I need to say, apart from, because this was just external works, the parking provision had been previously dealt with, as Mr. Dobie had already explained. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Dave. So the gist of that is you've done the measurements, and highways feel that the turn angles for a hearse is sufficient to turn into the rear of the property. That's
correct.
That's what you said in a nutshell. Okay.
It was looked at by my colleague previously, yes.
Right. Okay, thank you for that clarification. Now then, at this point, we will go over to committee, and obviously the committee may raise other questions, which we'll take back to the relevant officers in due course. So committee, I've previously mentioned, if you would like to speak, if you can use the chat function, please, and indicate by typing in RTS. I do have a hand raised there, but I have no idea who has the hand raised because I can't see everybody on the screen at the same time. So if you could type RTS into, okay. Councillor Lang. Yeah, so would you like to speak, Councillor Lang? Thank you.
Yes, please. It's Councillor Audrey Lang, Peterlee East member. Can I ask David Battensby, when they measured the hearses, was it the largest hearse? Because I'm sure nowadays they're absolutely huge against the 5 meters, 6 meters and 8 meters.
Would you like me to respond now,
Yes,
Madam Chairman?
oh, sorry.
Yes, the question's posed to you, so feel free.
The measurement of the hearse was based on the hearse used by the applicant for their business. So it'd be the type of vehicle that they would be using.
Yeah, but David, for future reference, you know, I mean, they don't last forever. You know, I mean, for instance, do you know of any other hearses that are larger than that? Or can we put a restriction that it can't be any larger than 8 meters, 6 meters?
The application had already been dealt with, so this application isn't one that we could put a restriction on,
right?
In terms of size of vehicle. But the 6 meters is typical of the general use of hearses. It's quite a large size, 6 meters.
Right. Thanks very much, David.
Thanks for that, Councillor Lang. So anybody else on the committee have any questions for any of our officers? If there are no questions, does anybody have a suggestion for a motion on this application? It has been moved by the officers for approval. So does anybody on the committee have any alternative suggestions, or do we have a motion to confirm that, please?
Can I move the officer's recommendation, Chairman?
Thank you, Councillor Lang. I've figured out what the CL is on the bottom of the screen now. So Councillor Lang has moved that application. Do we have a seconder from anybody else on the committee?
I'll second that, Councillor Sarah Iverson.
Thank you, Councillor Iverson. Now we have no, on the first, we've got no alternative motions, so I'll move ahead with the vote for this. And now I need to go over to our legal officer, Neil Carter. And Neil, can you just explain to committee and for the benefit of people who are not normally present with us how this takes place? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So what I'll do is I'll come to each member and ask them how they wish to vote on the motion that's been moved and seconded. So I'll be asking them if they're for or against that motion in a moment. Equally, if any member wishes to abstain, they can tell me at that time. So I'm going to move to the vote. This is for the motion to approve the application in accordance with the officer's recommendation. So I'll start with Councillor Brown and ask if he's for or against.
For the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Next, I'll come to Councillor Katie Corrigan and ask if she's for or against.
I'm for.
Thank you. Next, Councillor Sarah Iveson, for or against?
For the motion.
Thank you. Next, Councillor Audrey Lang, for or against?
For the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Next, Councillor Richard Manchester, for or against?
For the recommendation.
Thank you. And then finally, Councillor Arnie Simpson, for or against?
For the option. For.
Thank you. Chair, I make that as a unanimous decision.
Thank you, Neil. Yes, I did too. So in the matter of item 5A, the planning application that concerns Hill Rise House in Bourburn, committee have followed the officer's recommendation and approved that application. So thank you, committee. We'll now move on to the second application on our agenda this morning. And if anybody who was only joining us because of the first item would like to leave, then please do so. Or you are perfectly able to stay to the end of the representation if you so wish to. So item 5B on the agenda this morning is concerning the former community health clinic Schoolhouse Front Street in Wheatley Hill. This is a refurbishment into 5 individual self-contained flats. Neil, you've got a right to speak.
Yes,
would you like to
I was just going to say we need to make sure that Councillor Hawley is brought back into the meeting. You know, she declared an interest on the previous one, but I assume she wants to participate in this next item.
Yes, I can say Councillor Hawley is there actually, Neil, but you're right, we need to make sure everybody's here before we start, and I was going to do that actually before we start the item, so thanks. So as I say, this is the former community health clinic, Schoolhouse Front Street, Wheatley Hill, and the application is the refurbishment into 5 individual self-contained flats. Now, the planning officer who is going to take us through this presentation this morning is Jennifer Jennings, and Jennifer is with us. We do have several registered speakers, and as usual, I'll bring those speakers in as and when it's appropriate on the agenda. So, Jennifer, if I can move over to you now, please, for your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'm just going to upload the presentation now. Right, and as that's loading, just to start by saying that since the committee reports were published, comments from Durham Constabulary were received, so I will update members of their response during the course of this presentation. Can everyone see that? It's not very large, but I'm hoping you can all at least see the presentation there.
Well, I can see it, Jennifer, so I would assume if I can. Doesn't look like anybody else is saying that they can't, so. Okay, that's fine. All right, so the application is put forward by the County Durham Lettings Agency, which forms part of Housing Solutions team, and they are seeking permission for the conversion of the existing health clinic into 5 flats. The site location plan shows the site outlined in red. It sits on the front street within the defined commercial centre area of Wheatley Hill. The workshop units are located to its northeast. So that's to the right of the red line boundary, and it's marked as units 7 to 10 on the plan. Residential terrace properties are located to the west along Dennis Street. The aerial view shows the site in context with the surrounding area, so you can see the large wooded belt area to the rear, and then built development is on the remaining 3 sides. So some photos of the site just to demonstrate the site and surroundings. This photo shows the front elevation that abuts the front street. The proposal would see the removal of the curtain walling to the front there, and 2 front doors would be inserted along with 2 windows. These 2 photos show the rear elevation, with the photo on the right showing the existing car access point off Dennis Street into the rear parking area. The razor wire and the window security measures that you can see just there are proposed to be removed. This is a view of the remainder of the land to the rear of the site with the woodland beyond. The side gable elevation that faces onto Dennis Street would be altered to include 2 new windows at the ground floor level. And then this is just a view along Dennis Street. There were some issues raised about the number of empty properties. So just to clarify, the end gable to the left of the photo is directly opposite the side gable of the proposed flats. And then the terrace that you can see just to the right of the photo, 2 of the 4 properties were boarded up at the time of the site visit. The final photo just shows the adjacent workshops to the northeast or to the right of the property. The proposed site plan indicates that the footprint of the building would remain unchanged. Resurfacing works are proposed for the car parking area to the rear. And then the main changes, as already mentioned, would be the addition of 2 doors and 2 windows along the front elevation, which
and the replacement of the curtain walling with a matching render. This is the proposed side elevation that overlooks Dennis Street, and this also shows 2 new windows and then a new doorway. No changes are intended for the rear elevation or the other side elevation, which would be as existing. The ground floor plan shows the layout of 3 of the 5 flats at this level. Each is indicated by a different colour, purple, pink and yellow. It illustrates that each flat would have a separate bedroom from the main living kitchen area. And then this is the first floor plan, which shows the remaining 2 flats, again with a separate kitchen living area from the bedroom. Consultation responses received include Wheatley Hill Parish Council. They object to the proposal, expressing concern over the inappropriateness of this location to house homeless, largely due to existing problems of antisocial behaviour in the area, with the potential for future occupiers to be vulnerable to these issues. Concerns are also raised that future occupiers would likely have complex needs and the area could not provide sufficient support. Issues were also raised regarding safeguarding for young children attending nearby schools. The parish also further queried the extent of consultation undertaken, noting that a number of the nearest neighbours notified are in fact empty properties. The Highways Authority raises no objections. Internally, no objections were raised by Ecology Section or the Nuisance Action Team. However, the Nuisance Action Team did request a condition to mitigate noise within the property to protect future occupiers from daytime business noise from the workshops. The late comments from Durham Constabulary state the following, and I'll just read this out in full. Having full strategic oversight of the project and its purpose, Durham Constabulary support the development. It is noted there are pockets of antisocial behaviour in and around the locality, but it is deemed that Durham Constabulary and partners will manage this as we do in many locations. That fact does not deter from the probative value of having this building brought back into service to act as accommodation for those deemed appropriate by Durham County Council. 2 letters of objection and concern were received during the course of the consultation. They commented on the extent of consultation. They felt it wasn't wide enough. They commented on the impact on the nearby community centre and service users. Assurances were also sought that proper safeguarding policies and procedures would be put in place for effective day-to-day management of the flats. Further concerns were also expressed over the ongoing antisocial behaviour in the area. So the planning considerations are as listed below and highlighted within the committee report. So to briefly summarise, in principle, the proposals are considered compliant with Policy 6 of the County Durham Plan relating to development on unallocated sites. The site is in a highly sustainable location. It's located centrally within the settlement with ready access to sustainable transport modes and a small number of services in the area. The loss of this former clinic building to create flats raises no concerns given there is a replacement health centre that is now well established. The reuse of the building, however, is considered a benefit to the regeneration of the area, particularly as the building has been prone to vandalism. Although there has been concern expressed about the appropriateness of the proposed use in this location, it should be noted that there are limits to the extent of control that can be afforded through the planning system in respect of future occupiers. The applicant was notified of the issues raised and provided clarity in terms of likely tenancy at the flats, and they confirmed that the accommodation was to meet the needs of people at risk of homelessness, as is defined under the Housing Act 1985, which has a broader definition than just rough sleepers. On this basis, they have confirmed that there is no greater likelihood that clients would have complex needs or a criminal record than any other tenancy. It was further clarified that the properties would be managed by County Durham Lettings Agency, which is a department within Housing Solutions in Durham County Council, and they vet and manage all future tenants as well as provide a range of support services. It should also be noted that the proposals as presented are a scheme for the creation of 5 dwellings and fall to be considered under the remit of Policy 6. The proposals are identified as meeting the criteria listed within this policy, and the proposed C3 use, therefore, is deemed acceptable in this case. In terms of the impacts on the character and appearance of the area, the scheme is considered to a benefit through renewal and making good of the existing building. The use of the building for residential purposes is not considered to create significant adverse impacts on nearest surrounding occupiers. As previously mentioned, noise mitigation measures would be required and can be secured through condition. All flats meet nationally described space standards, with 2 flats being compliant with accessibility requirements. There are no concerns regarding highway safety or parking provision. And then in terms of the other issues that were raised, consultation exceeded requirements set out in the Development Management Procedure Order. And the other concerns highlighted as part of the consultation process have formed part of the consideration, but are not deemed sufficient grounds for refusing the application, as there would be limits to planning controls, as already stated, that could be applied to future occupancy of the flats. In conclusion, the proposals are considered compliant with Policy 6 of the County Durham Plan. Paragraph 11 of the NPPF states that development proposals that accord with an up-to-date development plan should be approved without delay. The proposals are therefore recommended for approval, subject to the conditions as outlined. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that presentation, Jennifer. And as previously mentioned, we do have several speakers. And so I'm going to move over to those speakers who I know are present with us at the moment. And the first of those speakers is Councillor Jake Miller, who is speaking on behalf of Wheatley Hill Parish Council. So Councillor Miller, I'll go over to you for your presentation. Thank you. You're actually still on mute. Jake. There we go. That's fine.
That as well. So, right. Thank you for that. My name's Jake Miller, and I'm chair of Wheatley Hill Parish Council. I'm here today to make a statement which has been unanimously agreed by all members of the Parish Council, and I'm here to object on their behalf and on the behalf of residents who have raised concerns with us. However, before I go on, I want to make it known that the police's comments referred to today are amended comments. On Wednesday, the 3rd of March, the Crime Prevention Unit published a comment on the planning portal stating that they have serious concerns with the proposed development. However, this statement was only available for a short period of time before it was taken down and replaced by a comment of support from a DCI Blakelock. Parish Council is surprised that a DCI commented on such an application. We've had conversations with police officers who stress their concerns about this development, and we find it odd that such a U-turn occurred within a short period of time. Having said that, the objections of Wheatley Hill Parish Council are twofold. I do, however, want to start by saying that our objections are by no means to a homelessness provision in the village. I myself have worked within the homelessness sector for some time and know exactly just how high the need is for more homeless services. To provide such accommodation should be a top priority for every local authority every year and not just during a pandemic. Our first objection is the location. The front street of Wheatley Hill is completely rife with antisocial behaviour. We are constantly receiving complaints from residents about the level of antisocial behaviour there and the damage being caused to surrounding homes and properties. We also get complaints stating just how long it takes the police to respond to such incidents. We are constantly receiving complaints about youths causing damage to the area. A few months ago, Arriva made contact to explain that they would no longer be operating in the area in the evenings onwards. This was because of antisocial behaviour, including youths throwing stones at passing vehicles, including buses, and one incident involved a driver being injured and receiving medical attention. Our MP recently became involved last year after receiving a number of complaints from residents about such behaviour. Since then, 2 site visits have taken place with myself, County Councillor Lucy Hovels, the police, street wardens, the fire service and Durham County Council representatives. This was to discuss the problems that happened on the street behind the front street called Black Lane, and it was to talk about how action could be taken to tackle this issue. Other examples include vandalism to our community centre vehicle. This vehicle is used to deliver Meals on Wheels to the elderly in the area, and without the quick reaction of volunteers that day, meals would not have been delivered for some time. The location of the community centre is just around the corner from the proposed plan. Further along from this building is our Co-op store. Recently that has been trashed and thefts have occurred on a number of occasions. Theft of a personal item from a worker of the funeral home just next door has recently occurred also. As a result of the level of such behaviour and crime, the Parish Council have recently asked Durham Constabulary to look into issuing dispersal orders to those involved in order to tackle the level of antisocial behaviour. It's because of these reasons that we feel that placing this provision in the centre of all this would not only put tenants at risk of becoming a victim of such behaviour, but also put them at risk of becoming involved in this behaviour too. It is about protecting everyone involved, not just those that are living there or committing the crime. I've seen firsthand how easy it is for vulnerable people to become involved in things that they may not have become involved in had they not been vulnerable. I appreciate Miss Rucker's comments about clients not having complex needs. An individual does not have to have complex needs to be enticed into behaviour by a group of people. They just need to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and the front street of Wheatley Hill is completely the wrong place. During community meetings, Durham County Council's housing team used to report month after month high levels of empty properties which they own struggling to be occupied. We ask whether it would not be better to invest the money from this government grant into those properties instead of renovating an entire building and turning it into something it is not already. Our second objection is based on the consultation and planning process undertaken. We feel the transparency of the process has been clouded. We were not involved within the original conversations. Ms Rucker mentioned in her supporting document that local councillors were, however the parish council were not, so I'm assuming that this means county councillors, but we were not notified nor were we included in those conversations. Nowhere within the application form itself does it mention that such a provision is for former rough sleepers or those at risk of homelessness. Instead, it is written in tiny font at the right-hand side of a document titled Proposed First Floor Plan. We accept that it is written under the proposal section in a document titled Design and Access Statement. However, we question why this was not written in the proposal section within the application form itself. Most people check the application form and we submit this would have been a more transparent document to put a proposal, not the plan of how it will look. The planning portal states that neighbouring properties were consulted with. However, we submit this could not have been effective considering that of the 21 residential properties included, only 8 of them are occupied, meaning that 13 stand empty but were still involved in the consultation process. We are aware that councillors have been informed that those properties are now occupied, which is why they were involved in the consultation process. However, given that the process commenced on the 5th of January 2021 and the fact that the electoral register dated 3rd of December 2020 means that 13 properties were filled in just less than 1 month and over a time frame where a lot of services would have been closed due to the festive period. After months of attending steering group meetings, as mentioned before, listening to report after report stating that county struggles to fill such properties, now we are told that 13 were filled in just less than a month. Of those 21 properties who were consulted with, includes one named Schoolhouse, Front Street, Wheatley Hill, DH6 3JW. That is the property we are talking about today, which means the county consulted with a derelict building which they own about a planning application they have made. To us, this does not make sense, and it makes us question the transparency of such an application. Ms Rucker states that the appropriate consultation has taken place as the flats proposed are not a specialist provision. However, within the 3rd paragraph of the document, it states that tenants will be offered housing management support in terms of paying bills, maintaining property standards, and linking clients into employability opportunities. Is this then not a specialist provision? I will reiterate that we are by no means objecting to a homelessness provision in Wheatley Hill. There are a number of areas and streets where such a provision would be better suited, somewhere quiet, somewhere with less antisocial behaviour problems, and somewhere where former rough sleepers or those at risk of homelessness will be able to enjoy living. Listening to youths throwing stones through windows or at buses, vandalising shop fronts and houses, and verbally abusing residents as they walk past is not an environment that I would consider enjoyable. It is not somewhere where a former rough sleeper should be housed. And it is upon these objections which I have made clear today that Wheatley Hill Parish Council have objected and continue to object to this planning application, and we ask you to reject it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that presentation, Councillor Miller. Lots of food for thought there. But now we move over to the local ward member, Councillor Lucy Hovels. And Councillor Hovels, if you would like to start your presentation now, please take yourself off mute.
Thank you, and morning Chairman, morning members and officers. I thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. Not very often I do this. I think it's the second occasion I've had to come to the Plan Committee in the 10 years I've been a county councillor. But this morning I'm representing the residents' voice, the people of the area, the people of Wheatley Hill. They feel they've not been consulted and their voice has not been heard or even taken into account. It's been as stated around the empty properties. The bulk of them properties have been vacant for a very long time. I go back 2 years when we had the visit from the MP John Healy looking at that state when we were looking at selective licence, and we've continued since then with the multi-agency walkabouts, bringing everybody together to address the issues that we face. That Dennis Street that you saw, 2 houses boarded up, there's only 4 houses in the street. I would love it if we could look at them particular issues and making sure that we have people living in them, because on the back of there we've got the age minors bungalows being developed, and again that work's taken place, so you can see the close proximity of those bungalows to such provision that we're talking about this morning. And like Jake, we do need places for vulnerable people, homeless people to live, but they've got to be safe. They've got to be safe, and we've got to ensure that vulnerable people, again, in terms of duty of care, and I don't think we've taken all those factors into consideration with this application this morning. So I would hope that I could express how I feel this morning. I do believe this application's rushed. I think it's all tied around the money that's been attracted, and I don't think due consideration is being taken into. The conversation hasn't taken place with the community of Wheatley Hill. And in the NPPF Part 8, and if you go to your documents, page 30, paragraph 11, promoting healthy and safe communities, that's what we're talking about, and that's what we're saying that we should be looking at. Local plan authorities should plan positively for provision and the use of shared space and community facilities. And I believe such provision needs wider consultation with the community. And yes, when asked about the wider consultation, we put a notice up. We're in the middle of COVID. We don't have people walking up and down the front street looking for notices in the middle of a pandemic. The NFPPF Part 8 states development should be safe and accessible. We don't believe this is a safe area to put vulnerable people. We've got high levels of crime and antisocial behaviour, and the police openly admit that, and will other agencies and our own staff. We're all familiar with that area, and like I say, we all have a duty of care for our vulnerable people. An integrated approach to considering the location of housing, economic users and services should be adopted. And I'm referring to all this which is in the report. This morning, Chairman, I don't want to prolong it. I think Jake's excellently put the facts before you. But the Crime Prevention Unit made representation, and yes, it was taken off quite quickly. It went on one day and it was off the next, and they were expressing concerns. And they advise us, they're the people that ordinary people go to seeking advice around crime prevention. And I do have a copy of it. I've also got copies of emails where it says we've got to get on with this process and get on with this application to make sure the money's spent before the 31st, or the work started before the 31st of March. I'm interested in in Wheatley Hill becoming a better place, a safer place, and I don't believe this enables that to happen. I think it gives us more problems that we're dealing with, and I would hope that this morning the committee have heard our concerns, the parish's concerns, and the voice of the local residents, which has been put through the community association. And I too ask for the committee to reject this application on the grounds of promoting healthier and safer communities. The NPPF PF Part 8 of the report. And this morning I would just like to say thank you for listening to the Parish Council, and also myself as a local member representing the views of our community.
Thank you for that presentation, Councillor Hobbles. At this point, I'm going to go over to Jennifer. Jennifer, are there any of those points that you would wish to come back onto, or would you prefer to wait until we've heard from Marion Rucker?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just make a couple of, just a small number of points. Really just in relation to the police statement. That came in on the 3rd of March, the original statement, and that has remained public throughout. We never took that down. And then the subsequent response was also, once that came in on the 5th of March, that has been made public and has remained so. So both sets of comments are really available. Yeah, we understand the issues in terms of the antisocial behaviour, but I think the difficulty we have is that the application before us is for the conversion of the building to 5 flats, and it doesn't fall to be considered under any other policy other than policy 6. And from that, on that basis, we find that it is in accordance with that. In terms of the transparency, the application, as I say, it is presented as a refurbishment of the building for 5 flats. The specifics of the occupiers is not something that we can control in planning terms. So it would be difficult to necessarily put that forward as a refusal reason. But we do feel the applicant has clarified the management processes, so we can just leave that to the committee. And just in terms of consultation, we feel that we have gone over and above what would normally be required in planning terms, in terms of a wider than usual consultation for the residents surrounding the site, as well as the site notice. I appreciate that obviously we're in lockdown, but the application was also available through the weekly list in the parish, where the parish will have picked that up. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. Before I move over to bring in Marion Rucker, who is designated as the applicant, but is speaking obviously on behalf of the department, can I just remind everybody to have themselves on mute, please, while other people are speaking? Thank you. So, Marion, if I can't see you, but I'm assured that you're present there. So, good morning, and I welcome you to the meeting. So if you would like to give your presentation now, you are limited by time. The other 2 speakers weren't. You're limited to 5 minutes, so I'm sure you'll be able to contain yourself within that. So if you would like to give your presentation now, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to clarify some points on this scheme, this is a scheme to develop 5 flats within the building for people that fall under the Housing Act of 1985. And that has a very broad remit. People have used the term about vulnerable people, about complex people, about rough sleepers. That Housing Act actually covers anybody who becomes homeless. So that could be somebody who has left home and needs a first flat. It could be somebody in a relationship breakup where they need somewhere to live, a partner moving out and needing a property. These people are not going to be vulnerable and complex. We have other housing schemes across the county that we have developed for such individuals, and it would be inappropriate to think about housing them in a scheme such as Wheatley Hill, which is why we have the benefit of Housing Solutions actually managing this scheme, so we will know at all times who is going to be in that building and occupying those flats. We do, obviously, through getting a homeless application or having people contact ourselves, get a lot more information and background on people so we can allocate those properties appropriately. With regard to the consultations, been a lot of discussion around notices going to empty properties. The owners of those empty properties still have a right to be consulted and to comment on what's happening to a property neighbouring them. Just because they're empty, they are still owned by somebody. So it is right that those people are still given that consultation right. With regards to the scheme itself, it is to help with housing across the county. We currently have no available properties in the east of the county. and we do have a major shortage of flats and flats with access for people that have disabilities. This building was identified a few years ago as being suitable, and we've been working to bring in the funding. Yes, there are time constraints on that funding, but there is with any funding that we bring in for whatever scheme that we work within. So ultimately what we are trying to do with the building is to bring it back into use, bring it into use for 5 flats and manage those flats effectively. They will be for general people who have been through the homeless service. They are not for people with complex needs and vulnerabilities. We have other such accommodation. We recently opened a complex needs provision on the 1st of February elsewhere in the county for those individuals. We do offer tenancy support to anybody that comes through our service, and that is what I am referring to in my response. So anybody that comes through our service, we do offer tenancy support, tenancy management. As a service, we see so many people coming back to us with a failed tenancy because they don't know how to pay the bills, manage the tenancy, set up direct debits, claim any benefits that they need to do. So we offer, and I manage as part of my remit, a number of officers who offer that to anybody that needs it, and we would rather put that management support in and link people up with what they need to do, give them the support and make sure that they are up, running and fine, than have people in a tenancy crisis and representing to us. And that is our long-term goal for homelessness within the county. I know there's been issues raised before about individuals that could be housed there. If anybody was housed there that had any form of criminal background, they are subject to police checks. We work very, very closely with the police, and we will continue to do that in the area with whoever we house. We normally do check names with them. We have an unofficial agreement where we do go through that process. So I can assure you that the flats will be effectively managed. We already manage
1 minute remaining.
properties. Thank you. We already manage a number of properties across the county effectively. We have a huge 100% success rate in managing our tenancies and ensuring that people settle, that there's no issues within the community. And we see this as an opportunity to regenerate a building as part of the first works that will happen in the area. There are other works going on with selective licensing, empty homes, and obviously we tie that all up, and we do see this as an opportunity to start moving that work forward in Wheatley Hill and the East Coast. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for that, Marion. Is there anything that you'd like to come in with, Jennifer, or anybody else on the panel before we go over to committee? No, okay. So at this juncture, committee, Councillor Miller, you had your hand up. Was that a mistake? Because at this point you're not able to contribute to the meeting. So yeah. So I'm going to go over to the committee at this point, and if you would, as I've previously mentioned, use the right to speak function. I see Councillor Lang has got the hand up. So we'll go with that one first. But if you could please use the right to speak function in the chat box. So Councillor Lang, you would like to speak? Councillor Lang, are you still on mute?
Yes, I was. Sorry about that. It says in here that properties are visited on a regular basis. What is a regular basis, and do we have an age limit or a starting age to go into these flats, please? And can I just make a comment while I'm on? These empty properties which had a letter delivered will more than likely have not even seen these. And does also police checks include drugs? Thank you.
Now at this point I'm going to go back to you, Marion, to answer those questions, but it may be that there's information that's in the report. So if you could just quickly answer those points that have been raised by Councillor Lang, thank you.
Yeah, Age limits are anybody that is old enough to hold a tenancy, so that would be 18 plus. However, we would consider who was already living in the area, who was living within the flats before we considered anyone, and we balance exactly who was within there. And that's part of our overall management policies, part of the lettings agency. Regular contact, it depends what's needed. We would expect to go out at least 3 to 4 times a week just to check everything was okay with the building, with the flats. And we tend to phone, especially under the pandemic, we've got into the process of phoning all of our tenants at least daily to check that everything's okay. And on police checks, it depends what the police bring back to us. But yes, if we know that there are certain issues in the area, we would avoid putting anybody with those issues there.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Councillor Lan. Does anybody else on the committee have any questions they'd like to raise? Councillor David Brown.
First of all, just a general observation, Chair. At this particular meeting, we seem to be getting overlap of planning rules and regulations, and then we get a large input of social or antisocial behaviour and residential problems. I wonder if the solicitor could point out the various weighting between the two particular problems, and finally, if this application was refused, on what grounds could it be refused? Thank you.
So Neil, I think we'll take that one over to you. You might need to have a little bit more clarity from Councillor Brown on the exact questions, but I'll pass over to you now, please. Councillor Brown, can you go back on mute, please, while Neil's speaking? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, this application's for a C3 residential use. So I think, as the planning office has already said, the key considerations are those that are in policy 6, which includes a number of criteria. You know, generally the planning system, you know, looks at uses of land and buildings rather than particular individuals who may occupy the properties. Having said that, issues of antisocial behaviour and fear of antisocial behaviour and crime are potentially material planning considerations. I think the difficulty we have here, specifically answering Councillor Brown's question about refusal, is that the police do not support a refusal reason based upon exacerbation of an existing antisocial behaviour or crime and disorder issue. You know, the most recent consultation response that we've had, which was an amendment to the previous consultation response from the police, makes it clear that there are existing pockets of antisocial behaviour, but they also go on to make it clear that they don't see this property bringing it back into use. This proposal that's before you is exacerbating that issue, and in fact, you know, it could be suggested that it would be a benefit to that issue, because once you bring a property back into use, then there's less chance that it's likely to generate the sort of antisocial behaviour that's associated with empty properties. So I think in terms of framing a refusal around antisocial behaviour and crime and disorder, it'd be very, very difficult for members to come up with a reason around those issues that would be sustainable on appeal, predominantly because we don't have the support for that from the police.
Right. Thank you for that, Neil. Do you feel that answers your points, Councillor Brown?
Thank you very much. That clarifies it for me. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that. Do we have any other questions from anybody on the committee? No. I do have a couple of questions, and I thought I would wait and see if the rest of the committee perhaps answered or asked the same questions. And my questions really will go to you, Marion. What I would like to know is the occupants of these tenancies, will these be on a long-term basis? You've mentioned levels of support going into the occupancy to allow the tenants to learn and to gain confidence. But will these be seen as long-term tenancies, or is this a measure to raise these residents' confidence in order for them to move on to other social housing providers, which we do have other social housing providers in the area, albeit there won't be as many with flats to offer, so the smaller modules of accommodation. So I would like that question answered, please. And I take it from what you've said, these tenants will come from anywhere in the county, although you've mentioned that we don't have a facility in the east of the area, so I guess you're looking at people from the east of the area, but they may come from other parts of the county who've been completely unaware of the issues or the area where they're being moved into. So that is one question. And the other question I have is around the property itself, which may need to come back to our planning officers. What is the basis of that building at the moment? Is it on the County Council's asset register to be offered up for sale, or is it not at that point? Because the point I'm getting at is if this application doesn't go ahead and that building still remains empty, is it a possibility in the future that it's bought by somebody else who tries to come forward with a similar scheme where we wouldn't have as many safeguarding controls in place? Because I have seen that happen in other. So I'm just curious about what is the plan for that building if it's been empty for any significant time. So there are my two questions. If Marion, if you can answer the first one, please, about the tenants, and then if somebody can find out about the property itself. Thank you, Marion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can probably answer all your questions. I work very closely with our CPAL department on our assets. On the occupants, we would allow people to stay there for up to 3 years. We obviously have to protect, with it being a council housing, we have to protect ourselves against the right to buy on the properties. So we give an unsecured tenancy agreement and aim to move people on before the 3 years when they start to get the right to buy. It's something we do through the lettings agency in general. We make sure that people are in a tenancy, managing it fine, and work with social providers to find them longer term accommodation. We've got an excellent success rate on that. Ultimately, we would want to take people from the east of the county to that scheme. We don't want to move people from other parts of the county. I generally do believe that people need to be in their local areas or as close to that as possible. A lot of the times when we offer people properties as a housing offer under homeless legislation and homeless duties, it has to be within a certain area that they've chosen, and that's generally close to where they live. And what we also find is people don't want to move from Chelsea Street or Concert to Wheatley Hill. So we try to reserve housing in certain areas of people that are local to those areas. And yes, the property is on our asset register, and it could be sold off going forward. It was one of a number of properties that we've been working our way through across the county.
Right, okay, thank you for that, Marion. That does answer, and it just puts a little bit more meat on the bones for the committee to consider when they're making their recommendations. So does anybody else on the committee have any questions of anybody present here, or does anybody feel at this point that they would like to formulate a motion? Councillor Lang.
I'm sorry about me hand again, but I've lost the bottom of me screen, so like I said, I apologise for the hand being raised. I'm actually a bit disappointed that there's nothing, as David Brown's asked, what we can come forward on to refuse this application. I mean, the only one I could see, and I'm sure this is what Neil alluded to, was the NPPF Part H, which I'm sure Lucy spoke to and about as well. So because of those circumstances, Chairman, we've been advised that there isn't anything we can put forward. I'd like to move the officer's recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Lang. And do we have a seconder for that motion, please?
I'll second that motion.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. I appreciate the comments made there. So I will now move over to our legal officer, Neil Carter, who will go through the vote on this particular item. So Neil, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. So as before, I'll come to each member in turn and ask if they're for or against, and equally if any member wishes to abstain at that point, if they can just let me know. So this is the vote on the motion to approve the application in accordance with the officer's recommendation. So I'll start with Councillor Brown. Are you for or against?
For the motion.
Thank you. Next, Councillor Corrigan, for or against?
For officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Hawley, for or against?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Ibson, for or against?
For the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Lang, for
For
or
the
against?
officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Manchester, are you for or against?
For.
Thank you. And then finally, Councillor Simpson, are you for or against? Not sure if Councillor Simpson's still with us, Chair, or you may be having some difficulties with the mic button.
Michael, are you able to see if Councillor Simpson's still with us, please, and
Yes,
whether
I
he's
can
on mute?
confirm he's actually still in the meeting, Chair.
Yeah, so Councillor Simpson, can you unmute your microphone, please, and give your vote?
For the application.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson. Chair, that's unanimous.
Thank you, Neil. So thank you, committee. The vote on item 5B on this agenda is to approve the officer's recommendation of the refurbishment of this property into 5 individual self-contained flats. And I do appreciate and welcome all the comments that the committee have made. I think it was a very rounded discussion, that. Thank you. So back to the agenda, and item 6, any such business which has been warranted for consideration, and I haven't been notified of any such business. So with that, I will close the meeting, but I will remind members, if you can just stay present, please, until our IT representative has notified us that the recording has stopped. So thank you, everybody, for attending today. Been a good discussion on both those items, and I look forward to seeing the rest of the committee at next month's meeting. So thank you, committee.